This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And you have landed right here in the middle of Creep Street. Now, we are gonna kind of breeze through this intro because we have a very special episode today.
We sure do.
Of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We also have a TikTok. Of course, if you want more than just one weekly episode, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. Just wanted to get that out of the way real quick because, boy, oh boy, we have an incredible guest with us today on Creep Street.
Yes, today we are interviewing the lovely, the hilarious Jerry Minor. Jerry Minor was a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses for a good chunk of his childhood and growing up years, and we are so excited to be able to talk with him today. But you know what? That's not all he's done in his life.
Absolutely not.
He's known for so much more.
Absolutely. He is an alumni of Saturday Night Live. You've seen him on The American Office, Eastbound and Down. His credits it would be an entire episode all itself just listing his credits.
The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. The guy has been all over the place. In fact, he just directed a brand new show right here at the Second City in Chicago, the ETC's Great Altercations. It's getting great reviews.
Yeah, it's a fantastic show with some of our good friends in it as well. If you're in Chicago, if you're going to be visiting Chicago, we highly recommend you go ahead and see that because you don't want to miss it.
Absolutely. And Jerry was so kind to take time out of his schedule to sit down with us and talk about his experience growing up in the Jehovah's Witnesses, what life was like on the inside and outside, how he was able to break free, how it impacted his life, his career. And then, of course, we also talk about the wonderful things he's done in the entertainment arena. And it's just it was such a great interview. And we are so humbled and honored to have had him.
Definitely. No, we haven't done a full episode on the Jehovah's Witnesses yet. And we are going to. That is forthcoming at some point. But for those of you who may not know, the Jehovah's Witnesses is a religious group that came out of the mid-ish 1800s here in the U.S., and it has really exploded in popularity. I believe there's about 8 million current Jehovah's Witnesses today in the world, and they're kind of known for just being these really nice, polite people that go door to door evangelizing, spreading their own word. That's all that a lot of people kind of think about them.
Right.
But the unfortunate truth is they are a very destructive cult. They are a group that practices shunning, and that can be very, very harmful to people both inside and outside of the church, or they don't call it the church, but the Jehovah's Witnesses, the group. They also are known to have some very backwards, horrifying doctrine or rules, I guess we'll say, for lack of a better word, about sexual abuse.
Right.
We won't talk about that a ton today, but there is a great episode of Scientology, The Aftermath, Leah Remini's show about the Jehovah's Witnesses. You do not have to watch that before you listen to this interview, but it is a fascinating episode that we just recommend you check out to learn more about who the Jehovah's Witnesses are.
Absolutely. And that was actually how we found, because Jerry Minor is on that episode, and that was actually how we found out about his former affiliation with them. And when we realized he was coming to Second City to direct a show, we knew we wanted to reach out and hopefully be able to talk to him about it, and we're so happy that we were able to. So, citizens of the Milky Way, sit back and enjoy this interview with Jerry Minor. Citizens of the Milky Way, we have a very special show for you today, a very special guest. He's a Second City alumni, a Saturday Night Live alumni. Jerry Minor is with us today. Jerry, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show.
Yes, this is so exciting. We've been looking forward to this for so long, and we'll just get right into it.
Absolutely. So, Jerry, you came into the Jehovah's Witness when you were young. You had, I think it was, you said you were about 17?
My mom got involved with them when I was about 7 years old.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's when she got actually like a full-fledged member around when I was 7. I get mixed up now, with the actual years. But yeah, that was around the time when she got involved, yeah.
Now, before we really get into that, what do you remember, was your family religious prior to the Witnesses? What was life like before they came into your life?
My mom and dad were divorced, and so I could probably ever since then, my mom was like pretty religious. She was always looking for something, and a little more than just religious. I think she was looking for like a real group, something that was a little more, culty. And
right.
Really to say that, I mean, she was looking for that, but she was looking for a lot more support than just like a church,
Right,
we did
right.
that. We did do that, but she was very much into whatever group that she could be in. She was looking for, a family, basically.
What do you think about it appealed to your mother that maybe other faiths didn't?
I think, well, first of all, they came to her house.
Yeah. Right, showed right up.
And the moral, I don't even know how to say this, the black and white of it, the moral certainty of it. Yeah, I think maybe appealed to her. But then also, it was a part like she believed what they told her, and they came to her, and they came to her house. So, other things, I could say that maybe other groups didn't appeal to her as much because she didn't get as involved as she did with them. I should mention that we did have a family member, and I have an aunt. She had a sister that was one, a Jehovah's Witness before she became one. And she became very good friends with the woman that, or the family that kind of, the word you would call it, but to kind of ushered her into it.
Right, right.
That kind of friendship, it's the same thing for a lot of people, I think. There's an automatic family atmosphere, friendship, and if you're lacking that, then, which a lot of people are.
Right.
Or
right.
In any other case, too, it's a replacement of your family. Then,
right.
That's what is appealing about it. I think that what was appealing about her to her is appealing about it to everybody else that's in it.
Right. Now, how long, because obviously, at the age of 7, you kind of just go along with what your parents do, you don't really have a scope of, what's right, what's wrong yet, or at least to a nuanced degree. Around what age did you start to get those feelings of like, maybe this isn't so cool, essentially? Like maybe there's something off about this.
I really never got that feeling until I was disfellowshipped, so I was kicked out.
Oh, gotcha.
I was just kind of surprised by it.
Yeah, right.
I think that, all of the questions about doctrine and things like that were things that, just you don't think about. You have a lot of thought-stopping techniques that, as they would come up, like, things like the scientific things that we were taught, that would come up at school, or that I would bring up to my mom or to any of the other members or elders at the congregation, I guess just didn't think about it,
Right, yeah.
There were other things that as a teenager, the kind of the rules that were kind of set on me, I think I questioned a lot of those just because my mom was so intensely involved into the group that a lot of my rules growing up were more strict than a lot of my other peers that were also Jehovah's Witnesses. And so I obviously I would question that because I'm like, I'm not even seeing this in our literature, but but it was always backed up by the organization at large. So, there's things that's not in their literature that's kind of just in their culture that they kind of promote. And there's a tier within the organization too. There's people who follow the rules more than others.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was one. I used to say my joke was that she was Jehovah's key witness.
That's funny.
What did you like about being a Jehovah's Witness? Was there anything? I'm sure there was lots of stuff that you liked, but what were a few things that really kind of stuck with you?
I mean, to say that I like my friendships and the people that I met, that's obvious. They were friends with me, so
right.
And that had nothing to do with them being Jehovah's Witnesses. They were just human beings that we were forced to be with, to be together without everybody else, because they really discouraged us being friends outside the organization. But that is what I remember the most, are the relationships that I made, and I feel for a lot of those people and for all of them that are still involved in the organization. But it taught me public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm doing that well right now, but
you're killing it.
You're doing great.
Killing
comfortable getting in front of an audience, and that's something that I still do today.
Right.
Of course.
That without question, because I was doing that as a child. From the time that we started, from 7 years old, I was in front. They do that. Going out and talking to people door to door, even though I never liked that when I was doing it. I guess it did give me a kind of bravery, to be able to do that, and to have a thick skin about it too.
Absolutely.
I'm sure.
That I hadn't even thought about it. I mean, it's the equivalent, someone slamming the door in your face would be the equivalent of, getting heckled or something,
right.
On stage. So it really did. I could see how that would kind of prepare you for that line of work that you would eventually go into.
Yeah. What was it like going door to door?
Oh, I hated it.
What's the evangelizing? I don't know. Is that the right word? Yeah. What was that like?
Yeah, they call what do they call it? Field service. Sometimes they call it field ministry. I think they call it too. I never liked it. People don't like you come into their house, and I'm sure even now I don't see them doing as much now. But then, I live in neighborhoods where they don't make themselves as prominent, and I know because I knew where I was more frequent, the neighborhoods I more frequented when I was a Jehovah's Witness. And it was usually like in lower class, poorer neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
We just felt more comfortable there, you're more welcome there. Upper class neighborhoods might call the police on you. People are looking out their window. It just didn't feel as comfortable. Where in lower class neighborhoods, there's a lot of people walking around doing things, so you just feel comfortable like walking around the neighborhood, I don't know if it's that as much. I should say it is that way as of what I've observed in LA. I don't know, since the pandemic how that's going, but that seems to be something that kind of stuck with them. They do a lot more street work now, which is just them standing on the corner, and a lot less actually talking to people, which takes a lot more, like I said, thick skin to be able to just walk up to somebody and knock on their door and say, "Hey, I'm going to talk to you about it." They don't seem to do that because nobody wants to do that, and they seem to be more satisfied with just standing there with the literature and having people just come and take it, and not really talking to them. They've even taken to playing videos on. They might have an iPad when you may see them in a public square or something, and they'll play a video. I mean, that and they're getting a direct message. It's not out of their tradition to do that. In the 30s, when they first started, they would walk around door to door with phonographs and play.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the leader at that point in time was the second leader, Rutherford, who really was the one that kind of made it more of a cult I mean, obviously the first guy, had his own group, and he was the quote unquote, whatever,
Right.
Yeah.
the giver of the knowledge or whatever, and the second guy, and that happens a lot in cults like this, like Scientology and Mormonism. The second guy is the one that like really takes it up. Takes it to
Right,
the first
right,
guy's
really
like the
kicks it
founder,
up.
but once he dies, man, the second guy's like, okay, I'm gonna make this into something
Right.
that that lasts. And
It's so true.
and in that one, it's the same way. The second guy, his followers would go around and with a phonograph with his speeches or with his sermons and knock on the door, and then they just play a phonograph of his sermon. Yeah.
Wow.
That's wild.
You're right. It's very much like a David Miscavige taking over after an L. Ron Hubbard sort of thing. You're absolutely right. In fact, there was things about the theology that I found surprising, especially this. From what I understand, the Jehovah's Witnesses don't really believe in a notion of a hell.
Not a burning hell.
Which-
no.
Right, which I found so fascinating because at first I was like, well, then what? Then what's the motivator? But then it became very obvious that the fear of shunning was a hell in itself, essentially.
Even more, right.
That was the hell.
Yes, and for them also the fear of the the great day of Armageddon, when
Right.
evil and whatever be judged, and people will be killed basically with fire and brimstone. So that you fear that.
Right. Yeah, that's scary. That's still very scary.
Right.
Right. Now, obviously, you would eventually go through you would yourself be disfellowshipped. But before that happened to you, were you ever on the other side of a disfellowship? Did you ever have to cut ties with someone who left?
Oh yeah, well you cut ties with anybody who got disfellowship. Yeah, so
Right.
Yeah.
there were people I didn't talk to anymore. That left. I mean, I didn't see them anymore. Most of the time. Sometimes I should say that. Actually, say most of the time, if a person was disfellowshipped, they worked their way back in. It's more of a it's more of a penance than it is a you get out, we never want to see you again type of move. It's a disciplinary thing. Now, when a person is speaking against them, in the same way in Scientology we would declare a person a suppressive person, that's different. That's like Jehovah's Witness may call that person an apostate. That is not necessarily a punishment. It is a declaration of like nobody should even be near that person, even beyond not speaking to them anymore. Don't accept their letters.
Right.
That person is working against goodness, or is on the side of evil, basically.
Now, from the time you got in at about age 7, from the time you got in to the time you were finally disfellowshipped, how long of a time frame do you think that was?
Oh, I left when I was around 19 to 20, so 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, had you already had performing comedy, all that, had that already caught your eye before leaving?
No. No.
Really? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I'm sure it
I
wasn't
mean,
like really allowed.
Right.
No, yeah. Caught my eye. I mean, I always admired it and liked it, and I was doing it at school, but yeah, as far as like taking any kind of like desire to do it or anything like that, no. But within a week, I was on stage.
Oh my gosh!
Wow.
Really? Within
Yeah.
a week?
Yes, yeah.
That's
I walked,
amazing.
so I was like, oh man, I think it kind of like dawned on me, I can do some things that I've always wanted to do.
Right.
And then I always wanted to get on stage. And so I went to a club that I knew did like a talent show every week or something like that. And I just went there. And they were setting up for the night. And I asked the manager, I was just like, hey, I know you do this talent show. I want to do comedy. And he's like, oh, do something for us. And so I did. So he got up on the stage and did it for the staff. Did some jokes for the staff. And then like very soon I ended up like going to a club and actually doing it. Yeah. It took me a while to like do it.
That's wild.
It took me a while to actually like get paid and
Sure,
and take
yeah.
a real interest in like it as a profession. But yeah.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
When we were researching for this, I saw you were you grew up in the Flint area, and I always get excited. I'm from Michigan myself. I'm from a small town though. I'm from Marshall, Michigan, which is near like
course.
Battle Creek, Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
But
Drive through there
so
all the
many
time.
great.
I drive from Chicago over there. Yeah, so you drive through Marshall.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah? Oh, nice.
So many great. I think Detroit, the Detroit area is kind of an unsung hero for. I mean, between you, Sam Richardson, Tim Robinson, so many great Second City folks came out of the Detroit area that I think kind of just get glommed into the Chicago. People just think they're a Chicago comedian, when there's so many great folks that actually came out of the Detroit, Michigan area and came to Chicago. Now, you obviously, when you did leave, as you tell the story in that excellent episode of Scientology and the Aftermath, it was a very, very harrowing story. What brought you to that moment when you said in the episode, you decided you were going to do something worldly and you were going to do it 100%. What led up to that? What was that breaking point?
I don't know. I think it was like just another part of me that was bothered by it. It was the things that I was like just blocking from myself. I had a friend, and it's in the documentary, who died. Didn't have a blood transfusion. I had another friend, and all my friends were just leaving in really horrific ways. Either dying or trying to commit suicide. I had another friend who kind of found himself in the same kind of situation that I did. He had a girlfriend. He got kicked out. He tried to commit suicide, and and it was all like all of a sudden, this would happen, because we were all around the same age. And so, yeah, I think it was just, I was getting around the age of like, is this going to be my whole life? It wasn't really working out. The promises that were made to me weren't like really working out. It was really difficult for me with no education to like find a job, so I'm thinking like, hey, is this what I have to look forward to? I'm not going to college. Other my friends who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses were, deep into their college experience and were coming out and having summer jobs, and I wasn't even doing that. I'm going door to door every day. So I think it was that kind of pressure that kind of built up on me, to where it just kind of.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
It always amazes me how, different faiths, they kind of will cherry pick certain things to highlight. Like, for example, there's the notion of the 144,000 that will sort of be the small flock, or the sort of the rulers, the folks that will rule from heaven once the end times have come. But then the rest will still get to live in a paradise on earth, essentially.
Is that right?
Am I interpreting that correctly?
It's basically because they, that was the beginning teaching, was that there was going to be 144,000, and then at some point they had more members than 144,000, so they had to come up with another.
Right. It amazes me because they hone in on this kind of rather obscure verse in Revelation 14 about 144,000, and kind of make that a tent pole, but at the same time kind of deny the idea of a hell, which I think most folks, even if they aren't familiar with the Bible, I mean, you would think it seems pretty explicit. They talk about hell quite a bit. So it's just funny how, certain faiths will choose to hone in on one thing, but then sort of do away with something else.
Their whole idea with that, I mean, it's not, they aren't the ones that originated any of those kind of, I don't even know what you would call it, breaks from traditional Christianity kind of things, I mean, there are other groups that don't believe in a burning hell, traditional Judaism doesn't. Even the more intricate things like the 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses that's not exclusive to them either. That was something that was really popular when that was taught in a lot of Adventist kind of religions. And then as happened with the Jehovah's Witnesses, as they got more members, as they grew, those teachings changed to, a symbolic number, to, a lot of things. So the only thing that's exclusive to them is that they are locked into a lot of their teachings in a certain way that a lot of other groups in Christianity aren't, because they aren't as cultish, So by them declaring themselves an instrument of God, basically, and they don't say the words inspired, but but they do declare themselves God's faithful steward, his representation on earth. You can't just change things willy nilly for your membership.
Right. Well, and also there's the notion, because, many Christian faiths obviously believe in some sort of an end times, but I think most don't try to actually pinpoint a date.
Right.
When you were in it, was that something, were they still trying to give out exact dates for that end time? Or by then had they kind of learned to not sort of try to put a date on it, essentially?
Yeah, we came in right after the 1975 thing, and actually that was right when my mom was getting interested in it, around 75.
Okay.
So right after that was what I would hear a lot. Their reasoning for that was that, and it was definitely like that was something they were looking forward to. They knew the idea of saying an exact date would put them in expose them in a lot of ways, and so they were really ambiguous with it. But there was no question that a lot of members were looking forward to that, and so but it was also easy after 1975 for them to say, well, the membership just were out in front of themselves and were taking things on their own and it wasn't really from the organization. So that's basically what happened. But the way that my mom would explain it was she was just felt good that it's going to be close, it's going to happen now. Every sign that we've read in the Bible and everything that I'm being taught is saying that it's going to happen soon. So we're just lucky that it didn't happen in 75.
Right, yeah.
That was kind of her attitude about it.
That's so funny.
Yeah, but yeah, I think they did maybe learn some kind of lesson. But I was taught that the Armageddon would come before the end of the 20th century. So, and I always expected growing up that it was going to happen within a year. That was just the expectation that I always had. Yeah, we lived that way.
Right.
For these elders. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Oh,
no. As far as dates, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter because the end is always imminent. I think for a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses that have been there for years, they've dealt with that and that kind of dissonance that comes from, always waiting for, something to happen. It's just for them, they just keep it all around. Now you're invested in something happening, so it's just always around the corner.
Right. And do you think that I don't know if this is the right term, so sorry if it's not, but the elders or the higher ups, whoever kind of make these calls, do you think that they purposely realize this is adding a specific date adds a lot of draws a lot of attention to us and can bring in that kind of invites in controversy for us? Do you think they purposely decide then to not choose a specific date?
Yeah.
Or do you think that do you think they know that? Or do you think they, when 1975 came and went, do you think that they were genuinely surprised that the world didn't end? Or do you think that they kind of knew that the world wasn't going to end and then do you know what I'm trying to ask? Am I making any sense?
Yeah. Is it in good faith? Are they making these predictions in good faith? Do they really believe that they're happening? There's actually a book that was written by one of their leadership is called the governing body. I think there's 13 of them now. They were passed on the leadership from one person to one person, and then at some point in the 70s, they decided to make it a governing body. Mm-hmm. And so that is the leadership of the organization. They're in New York. They're stationed in New York. They have a compound now in upstate New York. They used to be They used to be in Brooklyn. So there was a building with the Watchtower headquarters on it. You see, it looked like a watchtower.
Wow.
That they were really famous for, but they sold that to Jared Kushner.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. We're still kind of having trouble grasping what the Watchtower is. Kind of for people having trouble grasping the concept of what the Watchtower is. What is its role really?
Well, it's a magazine. First of all, it was a magazine started by Charles Russell, who started the Watchtower Society. So, so that's basically they have a lot of names. So, right. And that is partly the corporate structure that was started. It was started as a corporation. The Watchtower Tract and Bible and Tract Society is a corporation out of New York. I think that Charles Taze Russell, the founder of the organization, also was a businessman and was really into the idea of a corporation. and a religious corporation. And so that's what it is. What you would call a nonprofit corporation, but it is a structured like a corporation. There's a board of directors, which is the governing body. Governing body is a corporate term. It's not a religious term. And they even throughout the 50s even went through more of a corporate structure because it was basically a printing corporation for most of its time. It was one of the largest publishers of religious material in the world.
Wow.
Now that people don't read things in paper, I don't know how that stands, but that's what they did. I think now they're more concentrating on getting things out in different ways on the internet, through video and things like that. But then it was print. And that's what they concentrated on, and that facility in New York was a massive print center, and a massive publishing house that would publish in a million different languages, and they took pride in that, and that was something that to them was a sign of them actually being the true religion, and that they were getting their message out in so many languages, and all over the world. And that was again an appeal to other people too, and a sign that this was the real thing. But I was going to say, that governing body, there was a member of the governing body in the 70s that left and wrote a book about the whole, how it operates, and why he thought that, why he left. It's called In Search of Christian Freedom is the second book. I'm thinking about this stuff. I haven't thought about this stuff in a few years.
I'm sure it's really weird. Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of former Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm like, oh my God, he can't think of what's wrong with him? He doesn't know this. But I'll think of it before we end our talk. But he was a member of the governing body and basically a whistleblower. And for a lot of people, I mean, if I'd have read that book at any time I was a Jehovah's Witness, there's no way I would have continued to be one. And
really?
And I was in it when he was disfellowshipped for speaking up and having that opinion. Basically, before he wrote the book, I knew there was a big controversy within Jehovah's Witnesses, and a big exodus of people who left then. Yeah, and that was not long after 75.
Wow. What were some of the things in the book that would have made you leave if you had read it while you were still in?
The biggest thing was that they make decisions through voting, because and he revealed that, and he's like, well, we vote on things and they're supposed to be divinely inspired. And we were taught that they were supposed to be like really not, and they didn't use the word inspired, but that like actual God was talking to them in their brains. And so if he was doing that, then they should be able to agree on things.
Right.
That
totally makes sense.
And that was something that I always thought, because I'd ask that question. Well, how do they know? How do we get these rules? Especially as a teenager, I can't go to this movie, or I can't play sports, or I can't do this thing. Well, who's making this rule? Because we have a Bible, and that has these rules, and that doesn't say that I can't listen to Prince. So tell me exactly where this is coming from. And they would go, well, the governing body is saying it. Well, why do they get to tell us what to do? Well, they make this literature, they write this literature, and these are the rules that we go by because. And that's basically the decision that every Jehovah's Witness has to make. Why do we go door to door? Why do we have any of these rules? It's because the governing body are the leaders, and they're supposed to obey them. They specifically ask us to obey the governing body. And so, if I didn't know that they have vote, then I'm like, okay, well then they don't know what they're doing either.
Right. And speaking of voting, that's something I was surprised to learn, that the Jehovah's Witnesses discourage really any political activity, whether it be voting in an election or even celebrating holidays. Because of their supposed pagan roots, as we know, like Christmas was kind of born out of Yule, all this stuff. But so they don't really celebrate holidays or even birthdays. And I know on that special, the Scientology special, you had said that even as an adult, you struggle to really have an enthusiasm for these things. No, I love all holidays. I'm an enthusiastic voter. Good. I was going to say,
but now I'm completely, it's completely gone.
Right.
I love my birthday.
Good.
Good. You should.
I'm the opposite now. I'm a little bit too like, every Halloween I'm always in costume.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I have a kid too, so yeah.
Oh yeah.
No, and I enjoy all that stuff. Yeah, and voting. Jehovah's Witnesses should know too, because we were discouraged from voting, but it is not a disfellowshipping offense. So if there's any Jehovah's Witnesses listening, you can vote, and you won't get.
Well, there you go.
You might get frowned upon, but
you can do it.
You shouldn't be able to get disfellowship, and they can change the rules anytime though on you. So,
well, there's a new voting block the parties can fight over. But
there's a couple million. There's a couple million in the States. Yeah,
you're right. That could swing a few states. So obviously, we come to the point now where you leave. You are disfellowshipped. Obviously, we could tell from your interview on that episode that it was such a heartbreaking experience. Was it all of your family? Did you
no
you were shunned by, or was it?
No, my mom and dad, were divorced, and so actually that's what I did. I went and lived with my dad.
Okay.
Good.
And that was something that I think that was something that was fortunate for me that I had a family to go to, and I think that was another thing of why it was so easy for me to not go back after I was disfellowshipped, which I was telling you the story. Like most people just do their penance and go back after a year. They even go to the meetings and nobody talks to them. They'll sit in the back and and basically be shunned. I didn't want to do that, so but I had somewhere to go. I had a whole other life to go to, and I had a whole other life that I would lead even when I was there, because my dad lived in the same town, and so I would see him on weekends, and I was like a different person. On the weekends, I wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, and then I'd go back, and he lived on the other side of town, and so I didn't even have to see those people. And then as I got to be a teenager, that kind of like got more mixed up, and I stopped having such a close relationship with my dad. The more I drew to the Jehovah's Witnesses, but I had somebody to go back to when I left. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Would you mind telling us, for those who haven't seen the Scientology Aftermath episode on Jehovah's Witnesses, would you mind telling us about your kind of disfellowshipping story about what happened?
Yes, I have to remember this. Yeah, basically I was disfellowshipped over sex. I had been what they would call reproved a couple of times because, as with many Jehovah's Witness teenagers, I found a girlfriend who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. And at the time I was kind of like trying to bring her in. But anyway, me and my girlfriend fooled around, and I would just confess. I would confess every time. And so, but I always was taught that if you confess, you may have to do another kind of penance, which is you can't have any privileges, what they call privileges within the congregation, which means doing things in the services, talking to from the stage, stuff like that. You couldn't do that, but you weren't exactly shunned necessarily, being that you weren't officially shunned. People weren't excited to hang around you if that was the case, if you were in that kind of, but it was more of like a probation kind of thing, you know what I mean? So I was surprised that that at one point they just kicked me out. But knowing that was about to happen just sent me in such a depression, because I didn't have any other friends. Like I said, it'd been enough time to where a lot of my friends who decided not to be Jehovah's Witnesses I'd lost contact with them, or with my friends that I'd grown up with or at school, and then I wasn't gonna be able to have hang out with my friends who were Jehovah's Witnesses. So, and then my mom, was my lifeline. Yeah, so it sent me in such a depression that I tried to commit suicide a couple of times. I tried to overdose, and luckily, I went to the hospital, and they were able to pump my stomach, and I survived. And after that, it kind of was like a big wake up call, because I got disfellowshipped after that.
Okay.
And so I thought it was obvious that I was showing that I was hurting, and that I was trying, and I was definitely sorry for what I had done. To make a long story short, and then when they disfellowshipped me, it kind of just was like a light bulb that went off, and it was no longer anger at myself, and I was just like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
And,
right.
And then from then I didn't look back. I went to live with my dad, but I lost a complete relationship with my mom.
Wow.
Were you ever able to rekindle that in the years since? No.
No. She died a few years ago, not long after I did the Remedy special. It was one of the reasons that I did that because I had lost contact with her so much that I didn't even know where she was.
Oh, wow.
And throughout the years, we'd talk, just maybe a yes, hello, how are you? Maybe a couple of times, 20 or 30 years,
Wow.
30 years from the time that I left. And then, but right before she died, I did get in contact with her. She was suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease. And I got a call from some other relatives, some relatives who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses, but who are relatives of my relatives who are. They were telling me, the kind of shape that she was in. And so I was able to have some contact with her and talk to her, a little bit, as much as she could before she died.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry about that. That is so hard to hear, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And it also just brought up some questions that I had about medical interference or whatever with the Jehovah's Witnesses. I know that Jehovah's Witnesses are not supposed to accept blood transfusions, but other than that, are you able to go to the doctor? Are you able to receive medical attention? Kind of, how does that work?
Yeah, blood transfusion is the big thing. They don't really
is the big one. Okay.
Yeah, because it's that and anything that's involved with blood. That has become a lot less of a thing because of advances in medicine. The need for a blood transfusion isn't as much of a problem as it used to be. Although it still comes up, people get in accidents and stuff like that, but they can deal with it a lot better than they used to be able to.
I know you had a friend that tragically passed away after refusing a blood transfusion. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of how that all happened?
It was more that because he, there's no guarantee that a blood transfusion would have saved his life. He had an aneurysm.
Right.
He was 18, but it was more the way that it was, he was martyred by the organization, seeing his mom and having her get up and talk about how, he didn't have the transfusion. And me knowing that, that's not necessarily why he died, but saying, he sacrificed himself for Jehovah and stuff like that, That was the kink in the first kink in the armor for me of what is this? And not even so much of I'm like, what is this organization? But it just made me uncomfortable, it just produced an uncomfortable feeling in me and without me even acknowledging what that was and depressed. It made me really demoralize me a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure that was something that I found so interesting during our research is that how, especially it seems to me, at least from my impression of it, is that children kind of become martyrs for Jehovah by refusing to get blood transfusions, or at least used to be. Maybe it's not so much like that anymore, but that's just fascinating.
Yeah, there was you may have seen it, a cover of one of their magazines, Watchtower magazine. And this was around not long after my friend had died, full of faces of kids who refused blood transfusions who had died, and it was all children.
Wow.
Really weird.
Yeah,
what? I know.
Yeah, it's
this is
all
people
kids,
that are so involved in their own thing. That's why your question about whether this is in good faith, the leaders and their views and stuff. I mean, that kind of stuff shows you that they don't have a perception of how the outside world would view that. It is something that I think that a lot of them have deluded themselves into believing that there is something to this, but they also know that they make mistakes and they know that there's things that aren't right. How they work that out in their heads, I don't know. It may be just a lot of cognitive dissonance. I don't know.
Totally.
Right. Now, so you're a young man. You've been disfellowshipped. How does comedy come into your life?
I mean, I was always, like I said, when I was in school, that was my opportunity to have fun and to be kind of normal. And so in a lot of ways doing that was making people laugh. And I will say that my mother was really funny and really enjoyed it, was a really big fan of comedy. And so watching it on television and comedy albums and stuff like that, I mean, that was something that, out of everything that I could enjoy. So So the first thing that, when I got out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the first thing I wanted to do was like kind of pursue that. I was like, oh, that seemed like that would be fun, and it's something I would obviously never be able to do if I was one, being a performer. But yeah, and also for me, it was something that I kind of felt comfortable doing. I didn't know how to do anything else, but I knew how to make people laugh, and so I'm like, well, this is something. Here's something I could do, And at the time, I was in. I went to college right after I got disfellowshipped, and
Oh, nice.
so it was a time for me to like experiment and be like, hey, is this something you like? And it was actually something I liked so much that I dropped out of school. So
Nice. Very
it was
nice.
like,
Very nice.
at a comedy club so late that it was hard to go to class the next day. And at some point,
yeah.
it was during the comedy boom, when there was like, every little bar in the Midwest had a comedy night, and so I was able to like travel and even actually tour around the Midwest.
And how did so obviously stand-up came first. How did you find your way into sketch comedy and then eventually the Second City in Detroit there?
I started doing sketch right after, somebody, a lady saw me doing stand-up at one of the clubs in Detroit, and she asked me to do a sketch show with her. And she said, I want to do this sketch show. It's kind of like what they're doing at Second City. It's this place in Chicago. I'm taking classes there. She would fly to Chicago on the weekends and take improv classes, and fly back. She was rich. Her husband was a retired baseball player. She was a doctor.
Oh, there you go.
But she would also sponsor these great shows in Detroit. She would buy out a theater, and we'd do these comedy shows. And so I did a show with her, and out of that show, a group of guys, comedians that were in that show, we decided to form our own group, sketch group. And so we toured. We did a lot of stuff around Detroit. We did colleges, and then when Second City announced that they were going to open a theater in Detroit, I auditioned, and they got in.
Nice.
Yeah. So we did it all on our own.
Yeah, absolutely. And because now we kind of get to more talk about happier things. And like when someone's newly converted to a religion, they're always the most gung-ho about it because it's like they have all this, they have to sort of catch up. So they're the most hardcore about it. Was there kind of a reverse effect once you were out? Was it like, now I've got to experience the world? Like, did you just kind of dive head first into...
Yeah, I had to make up for time,
Right.
So I got married. I started doing comedy. I did, all this stuff. Yeah, I dove head first.
Wow.
But I in anticipation for this, obviously I had to listen to your podcast because I've done enough podcasts where I didn't listen to them before.
Oh yeah.
Just sort of try to get an idea what it was. And I thank you for having me on because I feel like this is like maybe a departure from what you usually do. But I was also ready for a lot of stories because. In organizations like this, and I don't know if you've seen Under the Banner of God.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I love that story because, it's like you get a lot of Mormon history through this, this mystery, this murder mystery. And it reminded me of, a lot of these things happen in closed groups like this, and especially when there's a murder and it's kind of covered up or you don't really know because the group doesn't want to like let all of their stuff out, And so in the congregation I was in Flint, we had a couple of murders that kind of caused this like controversy. Yeah. And one that I really should write about because, I'm how excited about it, but it was actually pretty grisly and terrible. But
I know you're like, I love it, but I hate it. Yeah.
The story about this murder. But this lady was a member of our congregation. She was friends with my mom, and she would often complain about her husband. Not necessarily about how abusive he was, but not physically abusive, but he was just terrible. Cheating on her, he's taking the money and doing whatever, So the Jehovah's Witnesses teachings are that even if you have a non-believing mate, you do not, it is against the rules to divorce. Well, I should say this. It's against the rules to get married again.
Gotcha.
Right? If it isn't over the grounds of adultery, right? So you could get divorced, basically, but if you took another mate, a marriage mate, then you would be violating their policy, which is basically. So basically, you can't get divorced, basically, right?
Right. Essentially.
Essentially, right? So and this was oftentimes controversial within the organization that maybe a woman was in an abusive relationship. What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that woman, she could, get herself out of the relationship, out of the house, but she could not legally remarry. If she didn't have adulterous grounds for divorce from
Right.
a husband, or vice versa.
Wow.
Vice versa,
Right.
whatever. But we know what usually happens. Okay, so you know the way the world works. So anyway, that was often controversial within the organization. Like, what do you do? And how are you supposed to handle this? If we have this policy where you're not supposed to get divorced, even if you have a non-believing mate, what if that mate is abusive? Well, you just have to deal with it. You just can't get married again. But if you know that your abusive mate is cheating, then you can legally divorce. So my mom had a friend who had a husband who was like that, who wasn't necessarily physically abusive, but but even if your mate was adulterous, you were still encouraged to keep a marriage together.
Right.
And I remember this woman talking about all the things that her husband would do, or ex-husband, or she got separated at one point in time from him, and how hard it was, but she did go back to him at some point. During the time that she went back to him, she got murdered. And the story was, somebody came to their house and stabbed her, while her husband, who they had just gotten back together, was sleeping. He got up, realized that she was stabbed. She had stumbled outside and chased the person who stabbed her for whatever reason. Nobody knew. Came to her house and stabbed her.
Wow.
What the hell?
Okay, so obviously in our congregation, nobody believes this. That's the husband's story.
Right.
It's in the newspaper and everything. She lives next door to another Jehovah's Witness family, who are the ones that found her actually on her lawn, dying. Her actual children, some of which who aren't necessarily members of our congregation, but who also go to our sometimes attend our meetings or whatever, are also very suspicious of their own father having to do with this murder. But the police will not arrest him. So it's starting to become a thing in the congregation. Right? People are like, why won't they arrest this guy? He's coming now. He's starting to come to our meetings. He's starting to come to our services. He comes to the funeral, and it's a big deal that he's sitting right in the front, and his children are not sitting with him because they think that he has something to do with his mother's murder. So this goes on for a year, where we don't know what's happened, to the point where we get a talk, which they call a talk, a speech from the pulpit, from the stage, about rumors and why we have to, like chill out with the rumors and stuff like that. We don't know what happened because there's an uproar. I mean, all these people are like, we were friends with him, and we're like, this guy did it. He was abusive, everybody. She talked about what he was like beforehand. He has something to do with this, and they will not arrest him. Finally, a year later, the police arrest somebody for another reason who confesses to the crime and confesses to being a hitman. And it was done for insurance money.
No.
Yeah. So this is the thing that I would go back. I would go back to of I've never been in anything where any kind of organization, never worked in an office. I did live in a neighborhood where there were a lot of murders.
Oh my God.
But I also lived in a really bad neighborhood, and it was, it was the beginning of crack. So I had crack houses, on each side of me. So that made sense that there were murders there.
Right.
And it was also the early 90s where the murder rate was insane for some reason. For some reason, the crack also led to a lot of those murders. But this was but I was like, I've never been in anything where something like that has happened. And that was supposed to be God's organization. And then that same year, I was a mentor to a kid. A lot of times we would mentor each other. I would be assigned by the older people in the congregation, a younger man, and I kind of mentor him, and I would go over publications with him, study publications, Jehovah's Witness publications with him, and have a Bible study with him, And so there's this young man that I was assigned to mentor at some point, who was involved in a fight with some high school buddies, and the person that he got into a fight with died. And they killed him. So
Wow.
So he was on the run for murder.
Oh my God.
So the day before that was when most of us in the congregation had found out about the murder and found out that this kid was involved and knew that he was missing. And then that next day at the services, again, this kid is in our services.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Why do they show
The
up?
police are going to be waiting for you outside. He's crying with his mom, you know. But yeah, he went to jail for a long time. I don't know. I think he had a life sentence. And this kid was like 17. He got tried as an adult.
Wow.
But again, you know, like I was like, how is this happening? I've never been anywhere where there were 2 murders in the same year in the same congregation, you know, or 2,
Right.
you know, whatever people involved in a murder.
That's
Right.
crazy.
Do you find, because of your experiences, do you find that you kind of have a sixth sense for cult-like behavior or cult-like tactics just in everyday life? Maybe someone says, hey, I'm meeting up with a group of friends, we like to do that, but then you start to realize, there's something culty about it. We even see it a lot in our politics nowadays on both sides of the aisle. You see this sort of cult tactics, whether it's policing of speech or whatnot, or just a blind fealty to your side where you refuse to see the flaws on your own team. Do you find you have a sixth sense for that sort of thing because of your experiences with Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah, well, you know, a few years ago, I decided to go headlong into, you know, the whole experience of cults. You know, at one point in time, I wouldn't have called them a cult. It's kind of a pejorative. I mean, I would call them a cult to myself, but if I would describe it to anybody else and be like, you know, if I call it a cult, you're just going to be like, you're having an idea of it, and I don't think that really is the crux of it.
Right.
And so, and also they would, you know, really blanch at being called a cult. But I always felt that it was. I was like, you know, after Jim Jones, I'm like, they would have done the same thing if, you know, the leadership would tell them to. I didn't see that much of a difference. And at that point in time, that was kind of the only frame of reference that I had. And in the years since, I did a lot of like research with a lot of other former Jehovah's Witnesses and found out, you know, there was a huge community of people who had also been kicked out, who left, who also felt the same way, who felt that it was a cult. Then I got into contact with a person, Stephen Hassan. He's now a doctor. But
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I know exactly
calls
what
himself
you're
the
talking
cult expert. And, you know, and at that point in time, I'm like, you know, I want to know what qualifies as a cult. What is it? You know,
Right.
because, I heard this term high control group, which I'm like, that makes more sense. Cult is like religious. And so I read his book, Cult Mind Control, and there was no reference of Jehovah's Witnesses in it. So I called him. I'm like, hey, you know, I read your book, and I feel like I had the cult experience myself because everything you said in this book is, you know, about the former group that I was in. So I want to know what you think. And he's like, you along with thousands of other people have said that to me. I have a second edition of my book that's going to address Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, wow.
And he's like, definitely do, put that group into this category. And would you like to know more? So I ended up going to visit him and spending a week with him and him telling me everything that he knows. Is basically what he does in his therapy with people who exit cults. But I'd been out for, 20 years.
Right.
But I still found it really helpful with everything that, I had never really even thought about as far as things that were still affecting me, still things that I still believed, that I hadn't, hadn't even thought about. There were just like things that were in the back of my head, like, I'd always had this idea that aluminum gave you not necessarily poison, but there's a conspiracy theory about aluminum and what it does to you. And I'd never traced that back to being a Jehovah's Witness because I had read that in some literature, and I remembered, after that's where that kind of like belief in my head came from.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of other things, just personally in my life about how I viewed the future, So I will say that, my time with him and just being able to really think about that was a way that I was able to get in contact with my mom. Some things in my life I was just able to bridge the gap with, start a family and stuff like that. because of that experience.
Right.
So that led me down a road
Yeah.
of being like a cult. I'm not a cult expert, but I'm really into it. So you
Right.
said, do I recognize groups? And yes. I had a podcast for a while back. I'm in a network of people. I still am in contact with Steve a lot. I'm in a network of a lot of, former cult members from a lot of different groups.
Do you find that you still have, even after all these years, little ticks left over that you get hung up on, like from an old belief that you might have even forgotten where it comes from?
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't as much. And that's why it's harder for me to remember stuff right now. But that was part of what I wanted to do. That was part of why
Right.
I talked to him. I was like, what's this a cult? Is this stuff still in my mind? How does that work? And that's really the basics of Steve's philosophy, what he calls the BITE model.
Right.
That model of behavior modification. And so if you think about it that way, and you think about everything that you know about behavior modification, and I think about that stuff that I learned even in grade school or in high school, like B.F. Skinner, and how we model behavior and how easily it can be done with human beings. It kind of makes sense of that thing of cults being a phenomena of not just religion, but a human phenomena of groups. It's just a way,
Right.
Something that happens to us, and something that can happen to us because of the way that we've evolved, the way that we rely on each other.
Right.
It's kind of I'm trying to think of the word. It's not perversion, but it's a weird side effect of the way that we socialize.
Right. That is so interesting that these things just kind of happen. And kind of like what I was saying before about, or asking you before about, if people take this in good faith or they're going forward in good faith. Same thing with all high control groups or with cults too, where people can have such great intentions going into things. And then for whatever reason, we humans, when we get into a group together, can just start to be controlling.
Sure.
And how weird that is.
Yeah, the Chinese government isn't doing that just for laughs.
Right.
Right.
I think it's the best way to
Right.
govern,
Right.
And we constantly give them examples on like, well, maybe it is the best way to govern because they can't, democracy, you're going to decide with each other, you're going to agree on something. Come on. I'm just going to tell you, we know what's good for you. And so let's just do it.
Let's just do it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you think that informed your approach to comedy and performance? And when you have an idea for a sketch or a screenplay or something, how do you think that your experiences inform what you do?
I mean, it informed more what I did more, I guess work-wise than anything else. That I've been fairly, I felt independent. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this because I didn't want to feel like I always, owed somebody something. I wanted to feel the independence of being able to go job to job. But it also, in some ways I've had to learn how to work within a group. Obviously I was in Second City. That was a really good thing because that was the first group that I got in that really welcomed your individuality. I felt like this is a for times when it isn't, but this is a healthy group. This is what healthy groups do. Everybody contributes. There's not a top-down kind of structure, but it was like a bottom-up structure. It was the strength of Second City is the performers, and that was emphasized to me by the management, which was weird. So that was a really good experience for me to learn how to deal within a group. Then after that, though, it was still hard for me to deal with groups in some ways. Definitely hard for me to deal with authority in some ways. Yeah, right. So I had to learn how to do that. Well, it was like, how do you do that? No, I don't like being told what to do, but sometimes I do have to be told what to do. What do I do? And I couldn't just avoid that, all the time. I had to deal with why I had a problem with authority and why, that I'm gonna have to deal with it now.
Right. And so what does your life look like now? It's separate now that you've been out of, I almost said Scientology. Now that you've been out of Jehovah's Witnesses for a while now. What are you working on now? What's life like for you now, both professionally and personally?
Yeah, it's great. I couldn't, then I couldn't imagine what my life would be like now. If I could go back and talk to, the 20-year-old who was depressed and who tried to commit suicide and say, this is what's, in store for you. I would have never imagined that. So, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to tell my story, because I know that there's young people, and it's usually the young people who leave, who have a hard time like this, who at some point in their life are going to come to a crossroads like this. And to know that, this has all been done before, and it's been done many times. And so I've met so many of my friends who are former Jehovah's Witnesses. We all went through the same thing. A lot of us around the same age, to just let them know that this ain't new, and there's somebody out here, that would have helped me so much. I believe when I was growing up, to just know, like, oh, this is just what happens, and then I'll just leave here and I'll be fine. And also it would have given me a plan, because I did meet people who couldn't tell me their plan, young people when I was growing up, because I was telling you about the family that my mother was close to, and it kind of brought her in. There was a young man, the woman's older sons, who was really smart, and I remember to this day, he would do like little weird things. One day we were at his house for a gathering, and he was kind of playing this game that kind of showed how, it was kind of a telephone game, but how group mentality can take hold so quickly. And I won't explain the game to you right now because it'll take too long. But it made it really made my mother upset. It really upset her. And only a couple of years ago I kind of figured out what this guy was doing, because at some point when he turned 18, he was never showed that he had any doubts about the organization or anything, because that can get you shunned, and then you never get to talk to your family again. But if you can get your way out of there without making a commitment to the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is being baptized and becoming a full-fledged member, your family can still talk to you. And so there's a lot of young people who know that and who've made their way out without being disfellowshipped. I didn't know that.
Wow.
So this guy, when he was 18, he sponsored himself to take a bike ride from Michigan to Maine. And he was going to ride his bike, and he was, stop along the way, but he gathered money from the congregation and said, I'm going to do this thing. And it wasn't for charity, because Jehovah's Witnesses don't do things for charity. I don't know how he finessed this. I don't remember exactly, but I remember him kind of like getting donations, like, I'm trying to do this thing where I'm going to ride my bike all the way to Maine. And so people gave him money, and he rode his bike to Maine, and he never came back.
No, stop.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yep, never came back.
That's a great story.
So, I kind of want to embellish it, and like maybe I can write that too, of like this kid who
that's a great story.
He figured it out, and it made sense of why. And I was a little kid, so he was a teenager. He wouldn't have told me what his plan was, but it would have made sense of why he couldn't tell his plan, because if he told his plan, and then it's out, and then people are on him, and hey, do you have doubts? And he was able to just make his way out, but still have a relationship with all his family. And so, if there's like Jehovah's Witness kids listening to that, I really encourage them to do that, because there's really no reason for you to have to leave your family, and to have a confrontation. It's not really necessary. To try to get your parents out of that organization is a big task, but but if you don't want to do that and you want to get out of it, there's ways to do it without having a big confrontation, without you being disfellowshipped, with all this trauma that you have to put on yourself. You just have to know that, and be smart enough to know that you can get out of there without, that.
So, Jerry, you just opened a new show. You directed a brand new review at Second City on the ETC stage. Great altercations. It's getting great reviews in the papers. We know we have our dear friends are in the cast. What was that experience like, and creating this brand new show?
So great. It wasn't that long out of my experience when I started Second City. It wasn't that long for me being like within 5 years. I was, at Second City. Yeah, it was. It brought back a lot of those memories. And to be able to experience that again, at this age is just. I mean, I can't describe it how much fun it is, how much fun it was. It's too much fun. Doesn't pay enough for it to be that much fun. Because I do it forever, man. Like, I gotta remember, man, it's like this.
I can't do it forever.
I enjoyed it so much. Had way more fun than I did when I was actor there, because there's a different kind of pressure, and I also know how to enjoy it, now. I know what's in store for everybody after that, after this experience, and, and I know that this is the best. It really is, after years of working in Hollywood and in entertainment all around, in television and film. This is and even other stage, stage stuff. This was the best experience I've had in my career.
Wow.
Just to be able to create and to feel young again, and to be in it, but not to have the pressure to have to be there on stage. Yeah, it was great.
Right. Oh, that's so exciting. Is there anything you want to plug? Any upcoming projects or anything like that?
I guess I have to. I'm currently in a cartoon, an animated show on. Not like I get in trouble. I guess I gotta do this. I'm one of the stars in an animated show on Netflix. It's called Farzar.
Okay, very cool.
It's streaming right now. I guess if your kids can watch it, you might want to watch it. But if you got a 14-year-old son, that may be his favorite thing. I don't know. it's in that speed. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's awesome. Is there anything, just before we wrap up, is there anything that you wish that people knew about Jehovah's Witnesses or just high control groups in general that you feel like people kind of get wrong?
I mean, any of this stuff is not as benign as I think people take it. And it's not just the destructions of people's families like Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses, but you have groups, all types of groups. So right now, we just had a former prime minister of Japan assassinated by someone because of some involvement with the Moonies.
Wow.
Which is Steve Hassan's former group.
Right.
Which is really involved in a lot of right-wing politics all over the world. And a lot of these groups involve themselves in politics, the same thing that the People's Temple did, and they were seen as, like, before the mass suicide, they were seen as this benign group who would, involve themselves in local politics. And I wish people could see these things for what it was, and the involvement that they do have in our world and how much influence they do have, because they have a lot more influence, I think, than a lot of people realize. Or, things like however people may feel about Falun Gong, the newspaper that they produce has a lot of disinformation in it, and was really, like, helpful in getting Donald Trump elected. And people don't know, like, they think this is just like some right-wing thing. And it's like, if you go see the show, they're doing these acrobats and they don't know that it's backed up by Falun Gong, who's also publishing this crazy newspaper that has all this disinformation in it,
Yeah.
So you're like, oh no, it's this benign thing where they, they're just really, anti-communist, but it's more than that, So
right.
I think people should be aware of the dangers of a lot of these groups.
Absolutely. We couldn't agree more.
All right, folks. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up with our interview with Jerry Minor. Jerry, thank you so much for taking this time to talk to us. Like you said, we are such big fans, and very honored to have you on the show today.
Thanks a lot, man. Glad to be here.
Wow. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we were able to do this interview. I still can't even really believe it that we were able to do this. It is such a pleasure and so interesting. I mean, what a compelling story.
Absolutely. And thank you so much to Jerry Minor for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about a lot of things, not just Jehovah's Witnesses, but his career, Second City. Truly was just a joy to have that time to talk to him.
Yes, so feel free, if you're in Chicago or if you're going to be in the Chicago area, to check out Great Altercations at Second City. Also, check out his IMDb page and watch some of the hilarious stuff he's been in, or give him a YouTube.
Absolutely. And as always, before we sign off here, I will read to you the names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Alungfus, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Fire Starter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, and the Psycho Sam.
Thank you so much to all of our Patreon subscribers. We don't know what we'd do without you, and we're so grateful for all of you. Please remember to like, rate, subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend about us, post about us on social media. Anything that you can do to help spread the good word of Creep Street Podcast is, as always, so appreciated. We see it, we see you, and we love you.
Once again, big thank you to Jerry Minor for taking the time to talk to us. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.